Hello, my dear friend. Welcome to the Reflective Parenting Podcast. My name is Cindy Hovington, and I am your host. If you are new here at Curious Neuron overall and this podcast, welcome. I have a Ph.D. in neuroscience, and I am a mom of 3 from Montreal, Canada. And my goal through this podcast is to share the science that's focused not on telling you how to parent your child, but on how to support you as a parent, making you feel more confident and competent, and feeling like you've got the skills to regulate your emotions in really chaotic moments with your child. I specialize in emotional health for both adults and kids, and I want to make sure that you have the science of emotion regulation skills, which in general nurtures your well-being and your child, so that everybody in your family could be calm and collected and connected and have the skills to take on really challenging emotional moments. Today we are talking about something that I might have touched on before, but I just want to come back to this overparenting, this topic of overparenting, or you might have heard it as helicopter parenting, but in science and in research, they refer to it as overparenting. And there are a few things that I've been hearing and I've been seeing, and I realized it was time to come back and do a deep dive. I pulled out an article, a recent article that I thought would be interesting for you to know about, and some tips for you to know, am I overparenting? Because, I think that especially when it comes to overparenting, most of the time it's coming from a good place. We just want to support our child and we want them to be happy and we want them to have a good life. And then we don't realize that we might be doing or overdoing certain things in the sense that, or in a way that is going to impact their well-being and their future. And so I really think that it's important that we think about this. So this podcast comes out on Monday morning. There's a complimentary, I wrote a blog post for the Curious Neuron website. The link is in the show notes, or you can go to curiousneuron.com, our brand new website that I hope you enjoy. If you click on articles, you'll see it. It's the one at the top left. It's the one with the bigger picture since it's the newest post. And I really encourage you to share this blog post with colleagues, with friends, with family members, so that we can really understand what overparenting is. Because I think that this term helicopter parenting is thrown out so easily, like, oh, that's a helicopter parent. Yeah, but what does that mean? And I wanted to make sure that I brought in the science that was specific to that, which is specifically around self-determination theory, which we've spoken about here on the podcast. Because once you understand what the self-determination theory is, and as I've laid it out in the article, and we're going to talk about here, understanding what that looks like for your child. And in the article, I've contrasted young and older kids so that we know exactly what that looks like. I really want you to have this as a blueprint and understand what that is. And by the way, on our website, our brand new website, you can now save your article. So if you create a login, there's a link at the top right if you want to log in. And if you don't have a login, create it. It's free. That way you can start saving articles. You can also save podcast episodes. That way you don't have to search for it on Spotify and search for it on Apple Podcasts because it's not well done in the sense that it's not a search engine. We've created the podcast page so that you can search for a guest, a topic, a category, so that it's easier for you to consume Curious Neuron content and keep learning about emotional health for yourself as a parent and for your child. As always, I'd like to start off by thanking the Tannenbaum Open Science Institute as well as the McConnell Foundation for supporting this podcast. This podcast would not be possible without them. It allows me to get a small team that edits the podcast and creates the videos so that they can be placed on YouTube. I would not be able to do any of this. And so literally this podcast would not be possible without the funding that we get from these two amazing organizations. Also, this podcast would not be here without you. I received an email from a mom last week who said, well, you always tell us to email you. And so here I am. She shared her story and thanked me for the podcast and said she had been listening to the podcast for a while and never really took the time to rate it and review it. We're still friends. I still like you, but I appreciate that this mom took the time. And if you are listening to this saying, hey, I'm that parent as well. I've been listening to this podcast and just haven't taken the time to rate it or review it. Maybe you don't want your name to show up and you don't want to review it that way. Then just rate it and then make sure you're subscribed to it. Those two things already impact the metrics. So make sure you're subscribed. And then just rate it with 5 stars or 4 stars or 3 stars, be honest. But in addition to that, a big gift that you can offer me is sharing it somehow with a friend. If you're a dad listening to this and you're like, hey, this is a podcast that I think a friend of mine would enjoy, share an episode, a specific episode, or the podcast. If you're a mom and you're like, hey, I think that my sibling needs this, share the episode. If you're a grandparent listening to this, share the episode with other grandparents. I know there are clinicians as well. You can share it with other clinicians in a different clinic. All of that will help me grow the podcast, and that is the goal. And these organizations that offer grants and money, they are looking at these metrics. And so if nothing is improving and nothing is changing, it means that nobody cares about the podcast enough for them to fund it. So please, as a small gift, do any of these. Thank you. I had such an amazing call with kids yesterday. So every month inside the Reflective Parent Club, we have a call specifically for kids. We call them our family meetings. Parents are there and kids are there. And we spoke about how important it is to talk about our emotions. And we played this game where I tried to have the kids guess the number that I was thinking. And I said, can you see inside my mind? And the kids were saying, no, we don't know what you're thinking. And I said, well, exactly. It's the same when it comes to emotions. And these kids thought it was hilarious at the way that we were trying to guess what was inside our minds. And I said, that's why, even if it's just happiness, or if when you're feeling sad, or when you're feeling really angry about something, or worried or nervous, it is so important to share it with a parent or an adult, because we don't know what you're thinking and we can't guess. Sometimes we can tell by your face or your actions what your emotions are on the inside, but most of the time we can't tell. And so I'm sharing this with you because perhaps you have a child that likes to keep it in and doesn't share what's going on. Here's the language that you can use. And that's just a small example of what the Reflective Parent Club is. I want to give you, parents, number one, the tools so that you can cope with emotions. One of the parents inside the club at our weekly call spoke about how challenging it is to be at a grocery store with two very young kids. And if one doesn't want to be there, good luck finishing your groceries, and how hard it is. And in the end, that's not about changing the child's behavior in that moment. It's about calming them down. And you can't calm them down if you're at the top of Meltdown Mountain and if you are dysregulated. And so most of the work has to do with how you calm yourself down. But if what you're thinking in that moment is, everybody's judging me and I look like a really shitty parent right now, then you're not going to calm your own nervous system down. And that is the whole point of the Reflective Parent Club. I just want to make sure that parents realize the impact of having these emotion regulation skills and how much that influences a moment, an emotional moment that can be with your child, that could be with your partner, it could be with your parent or your in-law or yourself. Maybe something happened at work and your internal dialogue turns to critical internal dialogue, and it gets louder and louder. And so you struggle with getting some work done. Maybe your internal dialogue, when you step out to take a break for self-care, is very negative and it puts shame and guilt on you. This is all under the branch of emotion regulation skills. And I'll never forget what one of our new members a couple weeks ago said to me. She said, I didn't know that I didn't know how to regulate my emotions. And she, along with all of you, are the reason why I will continue to do this with Curious Neuron, and why I'm so excited that we have launched our clinical integration program, that we are slowly making our way into clinics, because I want you to be at the clinic and talk about your child to their pediatrician and say, I'm struggling with knowing how to support them with their emotions. Or you might say, I'm so stressed and overwhelmed, I can't do this, I don't know what to do. These are not questions for a pediatrician. These are questions for Curious Neuron. And so I want your pediatrician to say, hey, scan the QR code on the Curious Neuron poster in the hallway. They have the Reflective Parent Club and they have some free resources on their website. They have a podcast and a social media account. Use what you need to help you learn how to regulate emotions. That is my dream. And I hope you join me on it. All right, so there was this article that I thought would be really important to share with all of you because, again, when it comes to overparenting, I think that we're really quick to talk about what overparenting is, and we call it helicopter parenting. We point out a parent who might be a helicopter parent. But then in secrecy, we're doing it too. And maybe we're not realizing. And so this article called Overparenting and Offspring Depression, Anxiety, and Internalizing Symptoms. It's a meta-analysis. And this is by Zhang and Ji, written in 2023 and in the Journal of Development and Psychopathology. The link will be in the show notes so that you can access this source, as well as the summary in simple language on our website, kirstneuron.com. And all week on social media, on Instagram and Facebook, I will be covering this article in different ways. So how about we begin with understanding what overparenting is? So Segrin in 2012 defined overparenting as developmentally inappropriate parenting characterized by over-involvement in offspring's lives, in your children's lives, and decision-making. So when you become over-involved in their lives and decision-making, driven by the parents' desires to ensure that their children's success and protect them from challenges and obstacles. Let me say that second part again. So driven by the parents' desires to ensure their children's success and to protect their children from challenges and obstacles. So when you read that, you're like, but I do want to, I do want to support my child and make sure that they're successful in their future. I do want to protect them from challenges and obstacles so that they can overcome these. And that's where it becomes not dangerous. Let's not over exaggerate, but that's where it becomes, that's the gray zone that I think we have to talk about. And I think that's how we get stuck in overparenting without even realizing. And I'm going to put myself in these shoes. I have to catch myself in something that I've been repeating. And that's why this has become the Reflective Parenting Podcast. Because when we gain the skills to stop and to assess ourselves, look at the situation that we're in and say, I've noticed a pattern. Oh, wow, I don't think I should be doing this. Let me step back. Then we don't see it as mistakes and that we're the worst parent and we start to kind of label ourselves. We see it as a learning opportunity, but we have to notice and reflect. And the authors of this article in particular, when they spoke about the definition of what overparenting is, I love that they said, from this definition, the term overparenting not only captures the overinvolvement and excessive control, but also highlights parents' good intentions. And that's why I want to remind you, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh yeah, I fit within this, we're going to get into more details, obviously. I really don't want you to leave this podcast episode feeling like you've messed up. I want you to feel empowered that you now have the knowledge to change things, to reflect on how this might apply in your home. Maybe it's not you who's doing this, maybe it's your partner. And so if that is the case, I do encourage you to share this episode or listen to it with your partner in the car, at home, while you're making dinner, after the kids go to bed. Grab a glass of wine, grab a coffee, listen to this together so that you can say, hey, we are not aligned on the way that we're doing certain things, and we might be over controlling certain situations, again, with good intention. But how do we step back together as partners, as a couple? Many studies now have found that in overparenting, when a child is overparented, it does lead to consequences on their mental health and their well-being. And to understand why it leads to that, I think we all need to understand what the self-determination theory is. According to this self-determination theory, we all have three basic psychological needs. First is autonomy, so the need to self-regulate an individual's experiences and actions, so to do it yourself, right? To do things on your own. The second one is competence, so the need to feel like you have mastered something or that you're effective in doing something, right? That's feeling competent. And then the third one is relatedness, so the need to feel socially connected. These three are our basic psychological needs. When we are missing one of these, when just one of the three are affected, whether you're a child or an adult, there is an impact on your well-being and your mental health. And if you think about this in the sense that, let's just think about an elderly person. I'm going to think about my grandmother, because when I had told you guys last year, right? She has dementia and she had gone lost, and she ended up being in a retirement home. And that was a huge shift that most probably led to undiagnosed depression. But one of the three that were impacted the most from this shift, from owning your own home to being placed in a retirement home where you're living in a small room, you don't see the people that you see every day, your neighbors. You can't go out and just go for a walk on your own. You're stuck in this, on a floor that's locked. You can't even leave. Was her sense of autonomy. She could no longer eat whenever she wanted, or make herself a drink whenever she wanted, or sit on her balcony while sipping a cold beer during the summer. All of that was taken away. And so it was hard on her, and I could understand why. One of the things that we do as parents, without even realizing that it's affecting all three of these domains of the self-determination theory, is when we do excessive problem solving for our kids. And that actually threatens all three of these domains. So if you're listening to this saying, well, what do you mean by that? There's one example that I've been hearing, and this is an example with older kids, but I've been hearing a lot about this through other people who know people. So, I've heard it enough times that I believe it. But parents, doing the college applications for their child, writing the papers, and then they're not getting in and they're calling, the school. Or another one I heard of is even children who are in university or college, and parents showing up at the teacher's office because their child got a bad grade. This is an example of over problem solving for your child in a way that you have impacted all three of these domains. So number one, autonomy. You did not let them figure it out on their own. Number two, competence. Well, as a parent that is doing this for my child, basically I'm telling my child, you are not competent enough to write this letter and get accepted into university or college, or you're not competent enough to pass this course. And so I have to take over and go see the teacher and convince them to have you rewrite the test, for example. Whatever they end up saying to the teacher. And then the third one is relatedness. Well, I'm not giving you the opportunity to build your social skills and to feel connected to that school or that professor or that whoever it is. Maybe it's a job. Oh yeah, I've heard it as jobs as well, where parents are showing up to interviews with their kids. That is not allowing my child to have the nerves to mess up that interview so that they learn the next time what they have to do differently. I'm not giving them the opportunity to make those connections. And so doing these types of things, I think these are extreme, and these are truly impacting all three domains. And so this particular study by Zhang and Ji wanted to know, okay, if we look at, it's a meta-analysis, meaning that they look at a bunch of studies. So if we look at the findings of all of these studies put together, and these are the best studies, a meta-analysis is what's going to give you truly what is a result that we should be aware of. What they found is that overparenting, so a parent that does fit within, taking away one of these three domains for their kids by doing the problem solving for their child, for example. We're going to get into more examples soon. This was linked to their children later on having a higher risk or chance of depression, of anxiety, and of internalizing symptoms. So that's, feeling stressed inside, not knowing how to regulate their emotions, and feelings of worry. Those are internalizing symptoms. And those of us who have it, we can relate. It's not the greatest thing. We don't want this for our kids. And so you can see the impact. And you might say, but Cindy, I still don't see it. Obviously, if my child ends up getting a better grade or, they have less worries in their life, how in the world is this leading to them feeling or having a higher risk of depression, anxiety, or internalizing symptoms? Well, the thing is that when you feel like you're not competent anymore, what's the point of trying anything? If you're not autonomous, what's the point of doing anything on your own or even trying? You don't think you have the skills? And in the end, you have no idea what autonomy looks like. And then if you're older and you're like, I've had enough, mom, dad, step away. Well, guess what? Now you're 18 or 19 or 20 or older, and placing yourself in a situation where you are trying to be autonomous is nerve-wracking. But I haven't built the skills of regulating my emotions for all these years in these very stressful situations, like an interview, like taking an exam, where now I don't have the eternal dialogue to support myself, to motivate myself. I don't have the internal dialogue to problem solve this situation. And so my autonomy has been taken away from me. And I don't know how to be autonomous. And it's going to take a lot of time and a lot more time to do it as an adult now. What I found really interesting about the studies will look at age and culture and gender for certain things, right? To make sure like that this is similar across everything. So for example, overparenting, is it the same in both girls and boys, right? And children that are being raised by parents who are overparenting? Well, they looked at all of these. So they looked at associations with age, culture, SES, so socioeconomical status, gender, and all the results did not change. Those three, depression, anxiety, and internalizing symptoms, still stood out. They were similar in both, in all of these. However, the results were stronger when reported by the offspring, so the children, rather than the parent. So when the child says, my parents are overparenting me, when they have noticed, then you have overparented in a way that results of this finding are even stronger, indicating that parents may underestimate their impact. So in simple language, once the child realizes that they are being overparented, that I don't have the autonomy, I don't have competence, I'm not relatable, then that's when the impact of overparenting is much stronger. They also looked at the difference from overparenting from moms versus dads, and the effects were stronger when overparenting came from the mom. And so it's another reminder, again, if you are listening to this saying, that's me, I don't want you to leave this feeling guilty. I want you to leave this episode feeling empowered, that now you understand what overparenting looks like. And you're going to understand it even more when we get to the list. But I really want you to take a moment this week to step back. And as we do inside the Reflective Parenting Club, or the Reflective Parent Club, what we do is we notice first. And so if you can step back and start noticing, when and how often am I making a decision for my child? Actually, let's go into this list. So I want you to assess this week. How often am I solving problems for my child prematurely? So even before they realize that they have to solve a problem, am I just solving it for them? So what would that look like? Well, with a young child, if they're always looking for their plate in the morning, like where are plates in the kitchen? Here they are. You just open it. Here, take the plate. Rather than saying, do you remember where I went to get it yesterday? That's the difference. So how often am I solving problems for my child prematurely? Secondly is, how often am I making decisions on behalf of my child? The only simple thing I could think of right now is if you're out, I don't know, maybe at a restaurant, or you have to make a decision of what to eat. That's just a really simple example. For some reason, I can't think of anything else right now. But how often am I making that decision for my child? The third one is, how often am I hovering and micromanaging my child's activities? So if they're playing, outside, or they're at the park, am I hovering to make sure that I tell them, no, you'd rather go on the slide than the swing? Or if they're older and in school, am I hovering and micromanaging how they're doing their homework? The next one is, how often am I restricting opportunities for autonomy and independence? So an example I could think of, my kids, was it last summer, the summer before, they would want a bike ride down the street. And I said, well, they were still young at that point. And I said, well, you can go up until that really big tree, ride your bike up until that tree. And I will never forget the pure joy that they had, that they were no longer bike riding just in front of our home. And they turned around like, hi, Mom. They were further down the street. And I also felt like, okay, I'm letting them go. And this is a small example and a small step. but just reminding ourselves that we need to find ways to give them that autonomy and independence. Cooking something on their own, not fully if they're young, but what are the small steps I can offer them, rather than cooking for them until they leave and they move out of the house and saying, no, you're going to burn it. You're going to mess this up. Well, let's try to catch those moments now. And the last one is how often am I doing things for my child that they can and should do themselves? Laundry. I'm going to use my friend because my friend told me this the other day. So her kids are turning 10 and turning 13. And they do their own laundry now. 2 boys. And I respect that so much, because what do we do sometimes? It's like, well, we get mad at them. Your clothes are all over the floor. Well, if their responsibility is to wash their clothing, then they know they have to go around the home and their room and get their clothing. And it's Friday night, and so they have to do their own laundry. What a beautiful skill my friend is teaching her boys to do this on their own. They gather their clothing from the week on Friday or Saturday or Sunday. They get to decide when they want to do it, but their clothes has to be washed by Monday morning because they need it for school. And so she told me once that her older son came to her and said, Mom, I did all my laundry on Friday because I don't want to have to think about it this weekend. What a beautiful gift she's offering them. And so we can do small things like that, not yelling at our kids to clean their room all the time, but giving them certain responsibilities that allows them to gain the skills, the thinking skills, the problem solving skills, the independence. We don't have to tell a 5-year-old to do their laundry, but a 5-year-old can help us set the table, and the 5-year-old can help us clean and fold the laundry. It's a beautiful skill to have. And so looking back this week and saying, what are things my child can and should be doing on their own? To end this conversation around overparenting, there are more questions and reflections that you could think of. I'm going to name 1 or 2 of them, or maybe 3, I don't know. But I'm going to put the rest of them in the blog post on the Curious Neuron website. And I really encourage you to grab a notebook. If you don't already have a notebook that's a Curious Neuron notebook, I encourage you to grab one. We have one inside the Reflective Parent Club because every single week there's a reflection that I'm going to push you towards, to think about, to analyze and assess and notice certain things that are happening in your home. And all of these things that we're trying to notice are things that are going to support our well-being and our child's. And so for today, here are a few reflection prompts for you. I want you to ask yourself, am I afraid of my child making mistakes? The second question is, do I step in to prevent discomfort rather than helping my child build resilience? Right? And so these moments, once I had a conversation with somebody who was at this cocktail, and this dad came up to me and learned about what I was doing, and he said, I think every child should be bullied so that they can become resilient. The answer is not that. However, the answer is that our child and our children do need to experience discomfort. But discomfort comes in so many different forms. Discomfort, and my husband, he's not going to hear this episode, but he gives me I have a really nice picture of discomfort. Discomfort is my husband reading a recipe to make dinner, where I just read the recipe and it's like, okay, the oil is warming up in the pan. I've put the onion. And my husband, he's good at a lot of things, many, many things. But following a recipe is a thing that he really struggles with. And it's the only time we've been together for 25 years, not married 25 years, but together for 25 years. And the very few moments that I've seen him in a moment of discomfort is when he has to follow a recipe. There's a lot of stress around that. And I'll say but your pan isn't on. Oh, put the pan on. But why are you putting in the onion? You didn't chop your garlic. You're going to have to put it in 2 seconds. And I know it takes you 10 minutes to chop the garlic. And he becomes very uncomfortable. And so discomfort comes in many forms. And we want our kids to have this time, a discomfort. It could be for exams, for tests, right? It could be about cooking a recipe and being there with them to say, you didn't cut your onion and your oil is hot. What are you going to do? Or your water's boiling. Did you prepare the pasta? That's discomfort for a lot of people. It doesn't have to be getting bullied. Okay, let's be clear. The third reflection that I'd love for you to write. And maybe you're listening to this while you walk, or maybe you're listening to this while you are folding laundry or out with your dog, whatever it is. You can write each of these reflections on a Post-it. Grab one Post-it one day, put it in your pocket, or slap it on your wall while you are folding your clothes. And just think about this. Think about, try to notice your week. Go back into your week to think about them. The last one I want you to think of is, am I celebrating effort and independence with my child, not just outcomes? So again, this comes back to the mindset that we've spoken about maybe before, I'm pretty sure. But if a child just thinks that getting the good grade, the outcome, is what should be celebrated, then they forget that having tried your best. And this is not, hold on. So I know there might be parents that say, but that's failure, right? Like if you don't do well, I don't know, you don't win a soccer game or a hockey game, that's failure, and they have to understand failure. Yes, I'm not talking about coddling the kids so that every little effort, like, oh my gosh, you walked out of the house, yay. No, not that. I'm talking about, just understanding that there's an effort and an independence to trying to figure out how to study for a test. For example, my child's first, most of you know, I homeschool my kids, but they still have tests. And I remember the first test my daughter took, I didn't tell her how to study. I just said, I want you to study for this test and you're going to take this test. I left it that way on purpose. She failed the test hard and she was so sad. And I said, what can we learn from this? How did you study? Show me. And so she showed me and I said, how can we change this a little bit more? Because you struggled in understanding the concepts or the definitions, whatever it was. We went back to this. And then we started to build a study method. And now she's able to study on her own. She's in grade 4. And I don't have to tell her how to study. And so this is what I mean, right? I celebrated her effort. I didn't throw a party, but I just said, that's okay that you failed. We need to figure out why and work on it together. In the end, we just want to adjust how we are supporting our child. That is the take-home message from this whole episode. I want you to notice and then readjust how you are supporting your child as they grow, and just be mindful of that. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. And if you liked the fact that I did it this way, I haven't really done it this way, where I'm taking one article and focusing around it and sharing the article with you that way. And I'm going to have the blog and social media, everything will be connected. And if you're not part of my newsletter, I'm going to talk about this in a different way. If you enjoy this, let me know. Send me an email at info@curiousneuron.com. And if you send me a screenshot and you left a review and a rating, I will send you Meltdown Mountain for free, which is our most popular PDF on curiousneuron.com. You can purchase it if you want, if you click on shop. But if you want it for free, send me an email and I will send it to you with absolute pleasure. And I hope I get to see some of you inside the Reflective Parent Club. We meet every single Tuesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Time and at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. You come when you want to join. We have people from Canada, the US, from Europe, from Australia, from Singapore, from Japan. I'm all sharing their struggles and their challenges. And so it helps us feel less alone. I hope you have a beautiful and a wonderful week. I will see you next Monday. Bye.